My name is Claire Martin. I was loyal. Until the day my own father said I didn't belong in the business I practically built. 6 months later, I walked into a courtroom, laid my flash drive on the judge's bench, and watched my father's face crumple when the verdict landed. The supplier list belongs to her. Have you ever had to prove to your own family that you're not just the helper, but the reason it all worked? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And tell me, have you ever been pushed out of something you built? Now let me take you back to the moment everything began to unravel. The hum of the fluorescent lights above us sounded louder than usual that morning, like they were warning me. The back office of Martin and Sons Market Chain, my family's business, was cluttered as usual. Maps of produce routes, supplier invoices tacked to corkboards, half-finished coffee cups sweating beside forgotten clipboards. I was scribbling updates on the whiteboard, calculating supply projections down to the hour, when my brother strolled in late, still holding a barista-made latte like he'd earned it. Do you even know how much our avocado costs this week? I snapped, stepping away from the board and spinning around to face him. Darren looked up slowly, smirking like he hadn't a care in the world. Relax, sis, it's just groceries. My jaw clenched. It's never just groceries when you're supplying to 14 stores across the state. The shipments from Loma Rica were delayed 3 hours. That pushes our ripening window into spoilage territory. He let out a laugh, loud and careless. God, Claire, you need to breathe more. I need a logistics team that shows up, I fired back. Maybe if you left the cafe early enough to actually check your dock schedule, you'd know we're bleeding cost every hour we delay. The air snapped with silence. Then footsteps. The heavy, deliberate kind that always made my stomach tight. Our father, Harold Martin, appeared in the doorway, gray suit, blue tie, no smile. He surveyed the room with the same look he always gave his balance sheets, clinical and cold. What's going on? He asked, voice flat. Darren leaned back against the desk, still holding his latte like a weaponized insult. Claire's just doing her usual freakout thing, you know how she gets. She's not freaking out, I said, my voice quieter now but harder. She's the only one watching the numbers. Harold's eyes narrowed. Enough, I took a breath. Dad, I've been in this office since 5 a.m. recalibrating 4 store orders because of supplier delays. I asked Darren for doc manifests yesterday. He never, if you don't like how we run things, he interrupted. Maybe you don't belong here. It was surgical, sharp, fast. A cut delivered with perfect precision. My hand stilled midair, marker hovering just above the board. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were inching in. You don't mean that, I said quietly. He didn't blink. This is a family business, and this family decides together how it's run. I swallowed. I am this family. I've been building supplier relationships for 7 years. You wouldn't know how to renegotiate a freight clause if you're not indispensable, he cut in. Don't ever assume you are. And with that, he turned and left, like he'd just placed an order at a deli. Darren sipped his coffee and muttered under his breath, "Guess someone's not getting Employee of the Month." I stood there frozen. The numbers I'd been calculating blurred behind me on the board, meaningless now. I could feel my pulse in my ears. It was the first time I realized this wasn't a partnership, it was a setup, a hierarchy. One I wasn't actually part of, despite all the years I had given, all the fires I'd put out, all the suppliers who answered my calls on weekends, not theirs. They didn't see me as a leader. They saw me as convenient, but not for long. It was nearly 7:30 p.m. on a Wednesday and the main office had long since emptied out. Fluorescent lights still buzzed above, casting that same pale hum I was growing to resent. I stayed behind, not for the first time, cleaning up the mess someone else was too careless to notice. Tonight it was Tara, Darren's wife, newly hired into logistics. We both knew it wasn't because she'd earned it. Her background was in event planning. She once coordinated a pop-up wine tasting in Napa, and somehow, in Harold's eyes, that made her qualified to manage supplier inventory for a 14-location grocery chain. But I said nothing when she showed up last Monday in a designer trench coat and heels too high for the warehouse floors. I kept my thoughts to myself when she referred to our invoicing system as adorably outdated. And now here we were, on night 3 of me walking her through basic supplier reconciliation reports while she squinted at the screen like the numbers were in a foreign language. Okay, I said gently, pointing to a highlighted row on her monitor. See this line item, it says 24 cases of vine tomatoes were received from Buena Vista Farms. But here, I tapped the handwritten doc report beside her laptop. Your intake count says only 19. That's a red flag. Tara tilted her head. So we were short 5 cases. Yes, I nodded. Which means we either lost product in transit or there was a miscount. You'd log this as a discrepancy and flag it for follow-up before the end-of-week report goes out. She blinked. Claire, I don't know how you keep all this in your head. It's like a second language. I offered a tired smile. It's not just numbers. Every line is a promise. Every supplier, a relationship. They trust us to pay on time. We trust them to deliver what they say they will. Break that trust, and suddenly you're staring at empty shelves and a buyer on the phone threatening to walk. Tara nodded slowly, chewing on her bottom lip like she was absorbing some great truth. Wow, that's a lot of pressure. It is, I said simply. We worked in silence for a few minutes. Or rather, I worked. She scrolled absently, occasionally dragging one perfectly manicured nail across the touchpad, more interested in the playlist I'd put on in the background than the discrepancy sheet in front of her. Then her phone buzzed. A muted vibration on the desk beside her laptop. She picked it up, screen tilted slightly away from me, and smirked at whatever she read. Sorry, she murmured under her breath, typing a quick reply. Darren just, checking in. I didn't respond. But then she added something, quietly, like a joke not meant for both of us. He says thanks for softening you up. I paused. My eyes stayed on the screen, but every muscle in my body went still. Softening me up. The words echoed, clung, settled somewhere low in my gut like a warning bell. I kept my face neutral. Years of professional conditioning helped. What was that? I asked, feigning distraction as I highlighted another cell. Tara blinked, her tone instantly sweet. Oh, nothing. Just silly husband-wife banter. He's always teasing me about how hard your job is. Honestly, I don't know how you manage all this. You must be exhausted. I nodded, but I didn't look at her. My mind was already miles away, running backward over every conversation from the past 2 weeks. The sudden push for Tara to be trained in logistics. Darren's smirks at meetings. The way Harold had dismissed me without hesitation. Softening me up. So that when they cut me out completely, I'd already done the favor of handing everything over. Tara's voice cut through my thoughts. You okay? I gave her the kind of smile I'd perfected over years of swallowing things I wanted to scream. Sure, just tired. Let's call it a night. She packed up slowly, chatting about dinner plans and something she saw on TikTok. I nodded along, all the while picturing the supplier database I'd spent 7 years building. Every name, every alternate contact, every discount negotiated over midnight calls and crop delays. Every storm rerouted, every relationship salvaged. And now it was being passed, without ceremony, without credit to someone who had no idea what it meant. Tara left with a breezy "see you tomorrow," as though nothing in the world had shifted, but something had. As I shut off the lights and closed the office door behind me, that phrase kept repeating in my head like a pulse. Softening you up. And for the first time, I realized the blow wasn't coming. It was already in motion. Thursday evening, I stayed later than usual, hoping to catch up on the supplier turnover reports Tara had promised to complete by noon, but hadn't. I told myself it was just habit or dedication or pride. But deep down, I knew I was clinging to something that might not be mine much longer. The building was mostly quiet. Only a few lights left on in the executive wing. I was on my way to the copy room when I heard her voice. Tara. Her office door was cracked just enough for the sound to drift out. I paused, not because I meant to eavesdrop, but because the words stopped me mid-step. She won't fight. She thinks it's still her company. A pause, a breathless laugh. Yeah, I know, but Darren says once we're in, we don't need her. All the contacts are on her desktop anyway. Jay's soft. He'll come around. Harold already said I'd get her office. Something cold crawled up my spine. My hand, still holding the report folder, started to tremble. She wasn't talking to me, she wasn't even trying to whisper. I stood there frozen, like a kid catching monsters under the bed too late, so it was true. I wasn't being paranoid. They weren't just easing Tara into logistics to lighten my load. They were setting the table for a quiet execution, one I wouldn't even be invited to witness. I didn't move, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I turned and walked quietly back to my office, shut the door, and stared at the dark screen of my monitor. She thinks it's still her company. I did. Or at least I had. Because I was the one who stayed after hours to solve warehouse shortages. I was the one who negotiated year-long price locks when the market went wild. I was the one who spent 7 Christmases answering emergency vendor calls while Darren posted beach selfies. But none of that mattered. Because somewhere along the way, the math had changed. My loyalty had been weighed, measured, and deemed disposable. By the time I got home that night, I had already made up my mind. I needed answers. And if I was going to be cut out, they could look me in the eye while they did it. The country club was all white tablecloths and murmured laughter that night. I knew Harold would be there. He always took clients there on Thursdays. Steak night. I changed into something clean and neutral, tied my hair back, and drove in silence. The ache behind my eyes had settled into something dull and pressurized. I didn't want a scene. I just wanted the truth. I found him near the fireplace, talking to a man I recognized from produce contracts years ago. Harold stood there in a perfectly pressed jacket, one hand on his Scotch glass, looking like he belonged to a world I'd only ever been allowed to orbit. I waited until the client walked away before stepping forward. "Dad," he turned, eyebrows raised, surprised but not displeased. "Claire, what brings you here?" "I need to ask you something," I said, skipping the small talk, "and I need you to tell me the truth." He took a sip of his drink calmly. "All right. Am I being replaced?" A silence stretched between us. The music from the other room faded under the weight of it. His jaw tightened barely. Then came the smile, the practiced one. The one he used at fundraisers and when journalists asked uncomfortable questions. "Claire, you're imagining things. I heard Tara, I heard what she said. She thinks this is already done." He turned his gaze toward the bar as if watching someone pour a drink was more pressing than answering his daughter. "You've been under a lot of pressure," he said at last. "Maybe it's time you took a little break, recharge, step back and look at the big picture." I blinked. "So that's it. After 7 years, I get a forced vacation." "You've done great work," he said smoothly. "No one's questioning that, but sometimes a business needs fresh perspectives." I felt my throat tight. "You mean Darren and Tara, that's your fresh perspective?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was confirmation enough. My voice wavered just a little. "You could have told me. You could have sat me down. I deserved at least that." He looked at me then, and for a moment, just a flicker, I saw it. Not cruelty, not malice, just indifference, like a man unbothered by the inevitability of change. "You're good at what you do, Claire," he said quietly. "But don't confuse that with being irreplaceable." The words landed like a slap. I stood there, under chandeliers I suddenly hated, surrounded by rich men who didn't know the first thing about produce margins or overnight freight penalties, and I felt small, discarded, outplayed. Without another word, I turned and walked out, the echo of my heels swallowed by the thick carpet. The cool air outside stung my eyes as tears finally broke free. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, because something inside me was breaking. But something else was hardening. If they were preparing for life without me, they had no idea what life without me really looked like. It was just past midnight when I stepped into my apartment, the door clicking softly shut behind me. The quiet was different tonight. Not peaceful, not comforting. It was hollow like the pause between a decision and its consequence. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. Every step from the door to my bedroom felt deliberate, measured. My heartbeat wasn't racing anymore. It had slowed, steadied, like something inside me had finally settled into place. They were replacing me. That much was clear. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They thought I was leaving empty-handed. I dropped my purse by the couch and walked straight to my closet, kneeling to pull out an old canvas bag buried behind winter boots and forgotten scarves. My fingers wrapped around the dusty zipper, and as I pulled it open, I caught the faint scent of paper and time. The laptop inside was scuffed, heavy, and slow to boot, but it didn't need to be fast. It just needed to recognize one thing. From the inside pocket of the bag, I retrieved it. The flash drive. Black, nondescript, wrapped once in a rubber band like a secret too dangerous to leave exposed. I plugged it in. And there it was, everything. My life's work in spreadsheets and contracts. Redwood Organics 14% rate lock on citrus. Boone and Merritt Freight, priority hauler discount, renewable clause signed May 2019. Claybrook Farms, who to call when Miguel's on vacation, who takes emergencies on weekends, who accepts net 45 without fuss. 130 supplier contacts. 7 years of phone calls, dinners, emergencies, saved orders, handwritten notes from growers. Half the vendors didn't even talk to Darren or Harold. Some of them barely knew we had other staff. Because for years I was the bridge, the translator, the reason the shelves stayed full and prices stayed stable. And they thought they could cut me out like a bruised apple and keep the fruit intact. I stared at the database, my fingers grazing the touchpad with a tenderness I didn't expect. They don't even know what they don't know, I whispered. Because while they were busy positioning Tara like a pawn, they never once asked where the real map was. Not the reports. Not the dashboard Darren always fumbled through in meetings. The real list, with backup contacts, pricing history, seasonal volatility logs, personal notes. It wasn't just a supplier list, it was a network. And it was mine. I ejected the drive, held it in my palm, and stared at it like it was a matchbook soaked in gasoline. Then I stood. I walked to the wall safe in my hall closet and turned the dial slowly. It opened with a soft click. Inside were a few legal files, my passport, and now this. I placed the flash drive in a velvet pouch and nestled it deep in the corner, locking the safe again. But that wasn't enough. I grabbed my phone and pulled up my browser, typing with focused precision. Liberty Bank Vault Rental, Cleveland office. They were open by appointment. I booked the earliest available slot, Friday morning at 9. If they wanted to take the business, they could try. But I wouldn't make it easy. And I definitely wouldn't make it cheap. Friday morning, the executive conference room smelled like burnt coffee and lemon disinfectant. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle around the projector, just as they always were for quarterly meetings. I'd set up the slideshow myself, rehearsed the talking points, even printed color-coded summaries for everyone. 7 years of routine had taught me, prepare, anticipate, deliver. This morning felt no different except that it did. Tara sat to Harold's right. Her blouse was creaseless, her pen poised above a notebook she hadn't opened. Darren leaned back at the far end, lazily spinning a stapler between his fingers like we were waiting for a staff meeting, not discussing fourth-quarter logistics for a multi-million-dollar business. Jay sat beside me, our cousin, our quiet compass in operations. He gave me a small nod when I slid the binder toward him. I stood, clicked to the first slide. Fourth-quarter optimization focuses on 3 regions, Youngstown, Dayton, and Lakewood, each currently facing excess haul charges due to supplier overlap. I took a breath, glancing around. My proposal consolidates those routes using 3 midsize haulers we've successfully piloted. We save 21% on fuel costs and reduce delivery delays by. That's enough, Harold said. I froze mid-sentence. He didn't raise his voice. That wasn't his way. He just leaned back in his chair and placed both hands on the table like he was laying down a final card in a poker game. Tara will be handling supply from now on. Silence. I blinked. Excuse me. He didn't repeat himself. He didn't have to. Tara gave a faint smile, tight-lipped, practiced, like this had been rehearsed. Harold continued, his voice perfectly even. You'll pack your things today. 5 minutes. Then I expect you to leave your keycard with HR and exit the premises. This transition has already been approved by the board. Darren let out a sharp laugh like he'd been holding it in. Man, I thought you were gonna make it awkward, but you actually nailed it. He clapped his hands together once. Jay stiffened beside me. I stared at my father, no warning, no explanation, just gone. I didn't argue. Not because I accepted it, but because some betrayals are so sharp, they slice through the part of you that screams. I closed the binder with slow, deliberate hands. And I nodded. Without a word, I gathered my materials, slid the laser pointer into my pocket, and turned. My heels were quiet against the carpet, but in my head they thundered like war drums. As I walked out, I gripped the supplier binder tightly to my chest. My armor, my proof, my lifeline, not because I needed it to convince them of my worth, but because they'd just proven they'd never seen it. Let them laugh. Let them think I'd leave broken. They had no idea what I had locked away. No idea what I was already building in the dark. The door to my office clicked shut behind me, the echo sounding louder than it should have. My hands moved automatically, grabbing file folders, unplugging my monitor, yanking drawer after drawer open. I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to feel anything. The humiliation was still fresh, like a scald you only notice once the skin starts to blister. 5 minutes. That was the window they gave me to vanish. I didn't know what stung more, that they planned it, or that I hadn't seen it coming until it was too late. I stacked papers into a box, barely noticing when some slipped sideways, corners crumpling. My hands were trembling, my vision slightly blurred, and for the first time in years I had no idea what came next. The only thing I did know, I wasn't leaving that binder behind. It sat at the bottom of the largest box, hidden between innocuous folders labeled vendor archive and pricing history. It wasn't just documentation, it was my insurance policy, my evidence, my roadmap for what came after. The door creaked behind me. I didn't turn, a pause, then Jay's voice, low and cautious. "They're pushing you out." I glanced over my shoulder. He stood in the doorway, his tie slightly loosened, eyebrows drawn together. He looked pale in the face. And stunned. Like he was seeing the inside of a nightmare he didn't know he'd been living in. I forced a smile. It didn't reach my eyes. "Guess they want a fresh start." "With Tara," he said flatly. "She doesn't know half the supply chain. You trained her last week on how to read an invoice." I shrugged, pushing another pile of reports into a box. "Maybe I've just been too controlling all these years. Didn't you hear? That's my fatal flaw." Jay stepped inside and shut the door gently behind him. "Claire." I stopped packing. He looked at me for a long moment before crossing the room, picking up a rolled logistics map from the back shelf, the same one I'd color-coded with supplier clusters back in April. "I don't know what Harold thinks he's doing," he said, "but if he thinks he can erase everything you've built, he's out of his mind." I met his eyes. "It's already done. They made it clear Tara's the future, I'm the past." "No," he said, firmly this time. "You're the business, always have been." I blinked. Jay was many things, steady, quiet, smart, but not dramatic. He didn't say things to make people feel better, he said them because he meant them. He held my gaze, his voice gentler now. "You're not going alone." I shook my head. "You can't get involved in this, Jay. You have a family, kids, a mortgage. Don't throw your job away for what?" He cut in. "For the one person who's kept this place afloat for the last 5 years." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. He walked over and grabbed one of the boxes, sealing it for me. "Let them think they've won." A slow breath escaped me. For the first time since that conference room, I felt something shift, not quite hope, but a glimmer of resolve, a crack of light. Jay nodded toward the hallway. "Let's walk out together." I thought I'd cry walking out of that building. Thought the last 7 years of loyalty, overtime, and unpaid weekends would flood my chest as I carried cardboard boxes through the same hallway I'd walked down 1,000 times, never imagining I'd one day leave like this. But I didn't cry. Not when I passed the wall with our Founder's Values plaque, where Harold's name glinted next to Darren's, but not mine. Not when I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass conference room door, shoulders straight, arms full, chin lifted like I was moving into something, not out of it. Not even when I saw Tara standing behind the front desk, pretending to sign something while watching me leave, her expression unreadable. Jay walked beside me, one of my boxes balanced in his arms, the logistics map poking out like a silent protest. Then I heard a voice from behind. "Wait up, Claire." I turned slightly, careful not to tilt the box. Behind us, Todd, one of our warehouse coordinators, hurried to catch up, his hair still damp from unloading early morning crates. "Hey," he said, a little breathless. "Heard what happened?" I gave a short nod, unsure what to say. "Yeah, it's been a morning." Then I heard footsteps, more of them. I glanced over my shoulder again and saw Nancy, the assistant store manager from our Lorraine branch. Then Kevin, one of the overnight freight clerks. Then Alex, our longest-standing delivery driver, who hadn't missed a single winter run in 3 years. They weren't saying anything. But one by one, they fell in behind me. Silent, steady, walking. Jay didn't say a word. He didn't have to. As we reached the lobby, someone held the door open. It was Lydia from purchasing, biting her lip hard like she didn't trust herself to speak. When I stepped outside, the sun hit my face like a dare. I squinted, walked across the pavement, toward the employee lot. My car was parked near the edge, next to the old food truck they used for vendor events. And still they followed. By the time we reached the asphalt, we were nearly 20 strong. Some in branded polos, others in aprons and jeans, all of them walking with me. Not one of them carried a sign, not one of them shouted. But they didn't have to, because their silence was the protest. Jay stopped and turned to face them. His voice rang out across the lot. "She's the reason any of us still had jobs during COVID." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Someone clapped. Another echoed, "Damn right." I stood frozen. I'd been holding it together for hours, for days maybe, But something about that moment, about seeing those faces, the ones who actually knew the work I'd done, nearly undid me, not because I needed validation, but because I had started to believe the lie that I didn't matter, that I was replaceable. And here they were, showing up not because they had to, but because they remembered. I swallowed the tightness in my throat and turned to face them. I don't know what comes next, I admitted, voice quiet but steady. But, thank you for this, for walking with me. We'd follow you anywhere, said Todd. I didn't know it yet, but he meant it. And they would. I was just sliding the last box into the bed of Jay's truck when the office doors behind us banged open. The sound cracked through the parking lot like a gunshot. Harold, his face, usually composed, intimidating in its stillness, was flushed a deep, unfamiliar red. One hand clutched his phone, the other pointed like a weapon in my direction. Claire, he barked. Stop right there. I didn't. Jay gently closed the tailgate behind me, but his eyes stayed locked on our uncle as Harold stormed across the asphalt, his footsteps quick and angry like he was stomping out a fire he couldn't see. You don't get to walk out with company property, Harold hissed, stopping just short of me. You think I'm going to let you steal from this business? I didn't even flinch. Everything in those boxes is mine. Personal notes, drafts, old files, nothing proprietary, and nothing you even cared about until 5 minutes ago. He sneered. Don't play games, we both know what you've taken. That list, my list. You built it under our roof, that means it belongs to me. Behind him, Darren had appeared, pacing tight little circles like a panicked dog. He was typing furiously on his phone, sweat breaking out at his temple despite the morning breeze. I've got warehouse texts saying trucks didn't show, he muttered. I can't get through to 2 of our route drivers. The Youngstown store didn't open on time because no one had a key. Harold's jaw clenched tighter. Call the lawyers, he snapped, not taking his eyes off me. We're filing theft and breach of trust. Jay stepped forward before I could speak. She didn't take anything, Harold. You pushed her out. You dismissed her. If you're bleeding now, maybe you should ask your new head of logistics where the supplier backups are. Harold turned on him. You really want to go down with her. You want to lose your job over loyalty. Jay's voice didn't waver. She's not the one who just lost half the delivery fleet. I stayed quiet. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew silence would hurt more. I turned back to the truck, wiping dust from my hands, and opened the passenger side door. Let them rage. Let them panic. Let them spin in circles trying to make the world obey the rules they rewrote behind my back. They had laughed when I walked out. They weren't laughing now. Claire, I swear to God, if you don't hand over that supplier data, I will bury you in court, Harold growled. You think you're clever, you've made a very expensive mistake. I turned and looked at him fully for the first time. I haven't made any mistakes, I said quietly. I documented everything, I backed up nothing from your systems. My database was built on my time, on my own devices, using my own contacts. You didn't even know where half of it was stored until today. Darren looked up from his phone, face pale. We've got stores without staff, he muttered, more to himself now. No deliveries confirmed. No one's answering the dispatch line. We're bleeding out. Jay started the truck. The engine hummed like a promise. Harold didn't say anything else. He just stood there, staring as we pulled away, me in the passenger seat, watching the warehouse disappear in the rearview mirror. And I didn't look back again, not once, because they weren't just panicking over losing control. They were panicking because, for the first time, they realized I was never part of the business. I was the business. And now I was competition. 2 days later, the back booth at Miller's Diner was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it. Jay sat beside me, flipping through the blueprint packet I'd handed him without a word. Across from us, Lydia from purchasing, Todd from warehouse ops, and Nancy from regional sales each had their own copies, their eyes wide, brows furrowed, heads tilted like they were trying to make sense of what they were looking at. 3 leases? Nancy finally asked, lifting her gaze. All approved. I nodded, sliding a 4th manila folder into the center of the table. Signed yesterday. First shipments arrive Monday morning. Refrigerated dry goods and fresh produce staggered by location. Todd gave a low whistle. And you're not playing? No, I said simply. I'm not playing. I pulled out a red marker and circled 3 bold dots on the printed Ohio State map I'd brought: Cuyahoga Falls, Willoughby, and New Albany. Each location is within 10 miles of a Martin & Sons store. They won't see us coming until the banners go up. Jay leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his face. You've been planning this. I looked at him, meeting his eyes. Since the day Tara said she thinks it's still her company, the table went quiet for a second, the gravity of what I'd just laid out settling like dust. Lease contracts, build-out permits, supplier routes rerouted under new codes, a name. That's when I pulled out the last piece. A sketch on matte paper. Clean, minimalist, bold lettering. Red Barn Markets. Farm fresh, family-run, female-led. Lydia gasped softly. "Oh my God, Claire," Nancy clapped a hand over her mouth. "That's genius," Todd grinned. "You really did it, you're opening your own chain." Jay looked over at me, voice a little quieter now. "How many people know?" I paused. "Just us, and 12 core staff who walked out with me. Everyone's on NDA until launch day." Lydia glanced around the table, visibly overwhelmed. "I don't even know what to say. I mean, you've thought of everything." "I had to," I said. "They thought I was going to disappear, thought I'd be bitter, maybe post a few angry reviews, then get a job somewhere else. But I'm not here to make noise." I leaned in slightly. "I'm here to replace them." Todd let out a laugh. "Claire, this is war. And we're with you," Nancy added, her voice fierce, her eyes glassy with emotion. Jay raised his coffee mug. "To Red Barn Markets." We all lifted our drinks, some mugs, some water glasses, some half-empty coffee-stained cups, and clinked them in the middle of the table. "To a fresh start," I said. "To flipping the script," Lydia whispered. And in that moment, under the glow of a buzzing ceiling light and the smell of burnt hash browns drifting from the kitchen window, I felt it, what it meant to be chosen. Not inherited, not tolerated, chosen. By people who had seen me at my lowest. People who had nothing to gain by following me except the chance to build something honest, something strong, something ours. They took everything they thought I was and used it against me. Now I was going to take everything I actually was and make them regret ever handing me 5 minutes to pack my things. 2 weeks later, the cracks in Martin & Sons weren't just visible, they were gaping. Store shelves stood embarrassingly half-stocked in half a dozen locations. On Yelp, angry customers posted photos of empty dairy fridges and closed due to staffing signs taped to front doors. Even local reporters had picked up the scent, running headlines like, "Family Empire Crumbles After Sudden Executive Shakeup." I hadn't said a word publicly, but the silence hadn't saved me. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, hand-delivered by a courier who didn't even look me in the eye. Legal notice, Martin & Sons v. Claire Martin, misappropriation of proprietary business assets. They were accusing me of theft, specifically, theft of the supplier list. I smiled when I read it, not because I wasn't angry, I was, but because it proved they were scared. Really scared. They thought dragging me into court would break me, that the threat of legal costs, public scrutiny, and potential injunctions would send me scrambling back into the shadows. They didn't understand who they were suing. Friday morning, I walked into the county courthouse in a slate gray suit with clean lines and zero frills. I wore no jewelry, no flash, just a neat ponytail, a black portfolio, and eyes that didn't blink. Jay met me on the steps. "You good?" he asked. "I'm ready." The courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter. A few familiar faces sat in the back, former colleagues, reporters, even a few of our Red Barn early hires. I didn't ask them to come. They came anyway. On the plaintiff's side, Harold sat with his jaw clenched, Darren beside him, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept. Their attorney, a sharp-looking man in a tailored suit, rifled through pages, occasionally glancing my way like I was a petty thief who'd gotten lucky. I sat alone at my table. But I didn't feel alone, because in the folder on the table in front of me was everything they'd underestimated. The judge entered. The case was called. Attorney for Martin & Sons stood and launched into his opening. "Your Honor, our company is seeking injunctive relief and damages for the unlawful taking of proprietary data, namely, a supplier database created while the defendant was employed under our corporate umbrella. The database constitutes trade secrets developed under company resources, and her retention of this information constitutes theft." "Objection," I said calmly, rising to my feet. "Your Honor, may I submit evidence?" The judge motioned me forward. I stepped to the bench, opened my folder, and laid down the documentation one by one. Timestamps from my personal email showing first contact with every supplier dating back to 2016. Signed contracts negotiated under my name. Screenshots of the original spreadsheet, created on my personal laptop before any company system ever touched it. and notarized statements from 6 suppliers confirming they dealt exclusively with me, independently of Martin and Sons. The judge took the papers, brow raised. And you claim sole authorship of this data? I don't just claim it, I said, voice steady. I can prove it. I turned to Harold. You never even asked me where the list came from. You assumed because it worked so well it had to be yours. Darren shifted uncomfortably. Their attorney began to object, but the judge cut him off. I'll review the evidence. He glanced between us. But I will remind the plaintiff, intellectual property law favors originality, documentation, and authorship. If what Ms. Martin presents is valid, it will be protected. I returned to my seat, and I didn't look at Harold again, because I already knew this was more than a defense. It was the beginning of their undoing. The final day in court was standing room only. Even before I stepped inside, I could feel the change in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Heavy, breathless. Everyone was waiting for lightning to strike. I walked in calmly, same slate gray suit, hair tied back, no dramatics. I took my seat at the defendant's table, laid my hands flat on the polished wood, and waited. Across the room, Harold sat with his arms crossed, shoulders tight beneath his suit jacket. Darren looked worse than before, sleepless, jittery, pale. He avoided my eyes completely. Maybe he already knew what was coming. The judge entered. The room rose, then sat in unison. He cleared his throat and shuffled his papers. After reviewing the documents submitted by both parties, including emails, contract histories, sworn supplier affidavits, and digital timestamps, the room tensed. I find that the supplier database in question was created, developed, and maintained solely by Ms. Claire Martin, independent of Martin and Sons corporate systems. A beat. The next words came like a final blow. This database is her personal intellectual property. The plaintiff has no ownership. Gasps echoed behind me, a sound like a tide pulling back. Harold stiffened. Their lawyer froze mid-breath. And Darren dropped his head into his hands like the last string holding him together had finally snapped. I stayed still, just breathing, letting the moment land. The judge continued, almost as an afterthought. Further, the court finds no evidence of unlawful misappropriation or theft. The defendant acted within her rights. Case dismissed. My attorney, who I'd barely needed, patted my arm, grinning, but I stood on my own. I turned slowly toward the other side of the courtroom. Harold was staring at me with something between disbelief and rage. Not because he thought I was wrong, but because, for once, he hadn't won. I met his eyes and spoke clearly. Now I'm the competitor you underestimated. I saw it hit him, the truth of it, the reality that I wasn't going away quietly. I wasn't crawling back. I had taken the hit, rebuilt, and now was thriving without him. No one clapped. No one needed to. The silence was loud enough. Outside the courthouse, the crowd was larger than I expected. Word had spread. Former employees, local reporters, even a few customers I recognized from our stores. Someone shoved a mic in my face before I'd made it halfway down the steps. Claire, are you planning to sue for damages? Is Red Barn expanding after this? Do you have a response to the Martin family's accusations? I raised my hand gently. They quieted. I smiled, not wide, not smug, just enough. And I said, justice doesn't scream, it builds. Then I walked straight through the crowd. Every camera followed me. Every person watched. But I didn't turn around. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was legacy. And I was just getting started. The sun rose golden over the red-painted brick of our flagship store, casting long shadows on the sidewalk out front. I stood behind the tinted glass doors of Red Barn Markets, hands folded, watching as the line of customers curved around the block. Some clutched reusable bags, others held their kids by the hand, sipping coffee from the cart we'd parked out front for the early birds. It was barely 7:45, and we didn't open until 8, but the buzz had started days ago, first on Facebook, then in whispers between neighbors. Local, ethical, female-owned. Word had traveled faster than I could have imagined. Inside, the staff were finishing last checks. Lydia adjusted a chalkboard sign near the fresh bread, and Nancy was already chatting up a delivery driver near the stockroom door. Jay was triple-checking the registers even though I'd already done it. He caught me staring through the glass and grinned. "You sure you only want 3 stores?" he said, walking over with 2 coffees in hand, "because this turnout says otherwise." I took the cup he handed me. "Let's get these right first," I said. "No rush," he smirked. That's the most Claire Martin answer possible. We both laughed. This felt different from any opening I'd ever been a part of. No forced ribbon-cutting ceremony, no staged handshakes with local officials, just us. The people who built this quietly, stubbornly after everything was taken. At 8 a.m. sharp I unlocked the doors. And the first customer walked in. Then another. Then 10 more. We didn't do balloons or music. Just warm welcomes and full shelves, perfectly stocked produce, handwritten signs with farm names, smiling faces behind every counter. The soft scent of citrus and fresh herbs floated through the air like a promise. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like belonging. By noon, the checkout lines snaked down the aisles. Jay came up beside me while I refilled flyers at the entrance. "Guess who I saw outside?" he said, voice lowered just enough for only me to hear. I glanced up. "Who?" He gave a little head tilt toward the sidewalk. There, trying not to be noticed, was Tara. Hair pulled back, resume in hand. Standing in line at our side entrance marked hiring, apply within. I watched her for a long moment. She didn't look smug. Didn't look desperate, either. She looked humbled, and for once I felt no need to say anything. Jay gave me a look. "You want me to?" I shook my head. "No, let her apply like anyone else. If she wants a job, she'll fill out the same form everyone else did." He raised a brow. "You're serious?" I smiled. "We're building a different kind of business, remember?" He gave a short laugh, then nodded. "You're something else." Inside, laughter echoed from the butcher's counter where Todd now wore a red barn apron. Nancy waved from aisle 3, helping an elderly customer find gluten-free pasta. The place was alive, and everyone who had once been overlooked was now part of something they could claim. As for Darren, word had it he was living in a short-term rental downtown, divorce pending. Apparently, public scandal doesn't pair well with professional collapse. Tara's hiring had become part of the rumor mill. The very people who had tried to displace me were now scrambling to find ground. But I wasn't watching them anymore. I had a business to run, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something I could be proud of. Not inherited, not borrowed, earned. 1 year later, snow drifted past the windows of Red Barn's flagship store, frosting the glass with soft white edges as laughter echoed from inside. The produce section had been transformed into a holiday gathering space. Long folding tables draped with red gingham, mason jars filled with pine sprigs and fairy lights, plates stacked with potluck dishes from every corner of our team's family kitchens. We'd closed early for the holiday party, and no one had gone home. Every aisle had a story now. Aisle 2, where Lydia caught a shoplifter by pretending to offer help. Aisle 5, where Todd proposed to his girlfriend with a ring hidden in a bag of Red Barn granola. Even the checkout lanes buzzed with memories, like the customer who once handed Nancy a handwritten thank you note for stocking a rare brand of allergy-friendly cereal. 9 stores. 9. What started with 3 had quietly tripled over 12 months. Ohio, Pennsylvania, even plans for a 10th in upstate New York. And still, we moved carefully, strategically. No hype, just consistency, just trust. I stood near the pastry table, glass of cider in hand, as people I once feared I'd lose forever danced between displays and slow-drift snowflakes. "Claire," Lily called from behind me. My cousin, bright-eyed and now managing our Erie location, bounded over in red corduroy and a Santa pin, her arms filled with wrapped cookies. "We're doing a toast. Get over here." I followed her to the center of the room, where Jay, Nancy, Todd, and the others had gathered near the coffee urns and music speaker looping old holiday classics. They handed me a glass that had been filled while I wasn't paying attention. Lily clinked a fork against hers. "I'd like to say something." Groans and laughter rose around us, someone shouting, "Keep it under 10 minutes, she grinned. "No promises, but seriously look around. This room, this life we're building. It's not just because we work hard or because we left a toxic place behind. It's because we followed the person who deserved to lead. We always knew who the real power was." She turned to me, her voice warmer now. "And we bet right." The room clapped. Someone whistled. Jay nodded at me with a soft smile that said, "You earned this." I felt heat rise in my chest, not embarrassment, not pride, something softer, something like peace. I raised my glass. "Thank you, all of you. For believing in something that didn't have a name yet. For showing up, for staying. Red Barn isn't just a store, it's a place where we get to do things differently, where loyalty is earned, not demanded, and where leadership comes from contribution, not just bloodline." I paused, letting the quiet settle. This is the legacy we're building. Clinks and cheers rang out. Someone pulled me into a hug. Music rose again. And just for a moment, I stood still, watching it all from the edge of the room. I had been discarded, underestimated, betrayed. But I had not been broken. And as snow dusted the front windows and laughter filled the store that bore my fingerprint in every beam, every shelf, every smiling face, I knew this was only the beginning.